Hi everybody, this is Charlie with Forbes Truth. I want to thank everybody for watching, listening, and supporting my channel. It is my goal to bring you all cutting-edge content and bring you along with me as I dig deep and venture down every rabbit hole in pursuit of truth. But I need your help. I need you guys to help me spread the word. When you watch my videos, give it a thumbs up. Share the videos on your social media. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell icon. There's a ton more content coming, so stay tuned. Near-death experiences has really become a very predominant topic in my view, because I don't think it's really given a fair assessment, if you know what I mean. Your body recognizes that it's shutting down. It has a chemical release known as DMT, now, I'm not saying that that's just a hallucination. I'm actually thinking it's the eject button that releases your spirit or your soul or whatever, and then you have an experience outside of your body, and then this thing we call a body is a vehicle.
Yeah. See that. Let me interrupt you here for a minute. See, my perspective is I'm a spiritual being having a physical experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what we call dying is leaving this vibrational state of being called the physical universe.
Yeah.
And we become, or we can become, it's sort of waking up to, or emerging like a butterfly coming out of the cocoon.
Mm-hmm.
No longer,
So is it a state of maturing? Like we're maturing to the next phase kind of thing?
If you're maturing, but there are people that aren't maturing and they remain caterpillars. They go to hell.
As far as the life review, just real quick, as a Christian, I know that there's the great white throne judgment. And is there any difference between the judgment as far as like the life review, like how we fare as far as obviously Jesus accepted you for who you were at that moment. But as far as judgment is concerned, is that the judgment according to your perspective?
I believe it is. See, one of the things that is hard to explain to people from the perspective of near-death experiences that in this world we operate under linear time. We also operate under basically four-dimensional time-space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out there, those things are not applicable. For example, people talk about there's no time there. Well, actually, it's just the opposite. It's all time there. All time is simultaneous.
Yes.
And so it's very hard for people to get the concept that when you go into God's world, the past, the present, and the future to God are all present now.
So whenever the Bible references like eternal torment or forever or just in eternity in general, our interpretation of that, we try to wrap our minds around it, and it doesn't really
we project
translate.
A succession of moments, like in space we call a line a succession of points.
Yes,
like a
linear
succession of moments.
Yeah.
But in God's time, it's not a succession of moments. God works through the whole thing as if it's all present to God right there and then.
So when he says, I know that the end from the beginning, he's basically saying it's all now. It's basically.
Yeah. That's a really good book by that title, or The Eternal Now, that God is now. And so one of the ways that we can access God is through contemplation, meditation, try and get into the now, be more present to the present. I've read lots of near-death experiences, and I've talked to lots of people who've had near-death experiences, both good and bad. First of all, Number one, if anyone's had a real near-death experience, here's a test. You can tell the liars from the truth tellers because they'll tell you it's ineffable. They may not use that word, but they say you really can't describe it. You really can't, it's beyond words.
Mm-hmm.
Ineffable.
Yes.
And so why do you talk about them if our language is inadequate? Because we often feel a compulsion to want to talk about them, even though it's with great difficulty, and the vocabulary that we've been equipped with is inadequate to describe things that are beyond this world. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing is that there are reality checks. Okay. Mm-hmm. There is in the history of the world a body of I used a couple different terms: sacred literature, mystical literature, philosophical, theological literature, of which I've studied a lot of it, mm-hmm. not just the Western Christian tradition. I've also done some studies in other traditions. Mm-hmm. Some of the literature is difficult to understand because it doesn't follow like my Western idea of sort of rational flow. It's like the great turtle came and ate the, cockroach who spewed out the cornmeal.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean?
You're getting into the exact thing that I'm starting to look into now with ancient writings and like mythologies, because a lot of these mythologies have like these really deep, complex, type and shadow meanings.
Right. And, like, for example, I've done a lot of work in Central America, and I really like the ancient Mayan religion as I understand it. But mm-hmm. their language is all about animals and plants and, things like that. But if you think of it as symbolic, which is the mm-hmm. way I want to interpret it, it all starts to make a lot of sense, and is in fact amazingly, in many ways, converges with Christian understanding.
Yes, yes. I call it parabolic because Jesus always speaks in parables.
Yeah. So, the tradition that I know the most about is the Western tradition, and if a person studied real theology and not dime store self-help theology or radio or TV theology, which is a lot of, silly stuff. But I mean, real theologians. It's extremely rational, and ultimately it makes an enormous amount of sense. And so what I came to the conclusion early on, and this has only been substantiated with 34 years of more study, is that Christian theology does a great job of explaining who God is, who we are, and what the relationship is and should be. Greatest truth.
Yeah, I've began to take the position that there is none worthy, not one. And so to say that you're under the umbrella of the correct religion doesn't necessarily do anybody any good, in my opinion. Because that umbrella doesn't really help anybody unless they have a relationship with God, number one.
Well, as Jesus defined what great religion is,
pure and undefiled. Yeah.
He said, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
So that's my measuring stick of other religions.
Yes.
So when another religion says, put on an explosive vest and find a crowded bus and blow yourself up, I go,
Doesn't sound consistent with the love approach, right. For sure. Yeah. And I kind of look at truth like it's one big pie. So if you take like the big pie, which is 100% of truth, right? You could say that we have one sliver of,
tiny sliver
of truth. Yeah. And I think that all approaches could have some sort of truth there. Now, as far as, something that is considered false or deception or whatever, I often refer back to what Jesus was saying about, a little bit of leaven can corrupt a loaf. And I think that deception can, take you away from truth.
Yeah.
And so I'm on this kick lately where I'm trying to understand reality as being there's truth and there's deception. It's one or the other, and I'm trying to filter through that to see what is what, and obviously the lens of interpretation plays a role in that, and I'm trying to figure out what lens that needs to be. Now, I believe Christianity is the best possible lens you can have as far as interpreting our realm of reality, and I still believe that a lot of Christianity is limited because when Jesus was talking about the churches of Revelation, right? There was these different churches, and each of them were kind of falling in a different category as far as their effort level or whatever. And but he was condemning them in the sense that, wait, I'm judging you by your deeds, and obviously you're falling short. And he's talking to the churches, so I'm thinking, okay, these are just churches in Turkey or something, or Greece or wherever. So let me ask you this. This is another question that I had. So going back into historical mythology, you might say, and I say historical because I consider mythology historical, and that mythology was actually never intended to be something that was considered like a fake story. It was actually
right.
So these Greek gods or Roman gods or whoever were these people that were put in a. So this is where I start questioning, okay, how far back the near-death experiences go? I know that Plato or somebody was talking about. In fact, I heard Raymond Moody talking on this.
Yeah, it's in the Book of Timaeus by Plato in the Republic.
Yeah, so clearly these experiences go back. Now, the question is the experiences that people were having, and again, this is where I start wondering, okay, well, people's thought process on heaven and hell, did that come from near-death experiences? I mean, or because obviously after you die, you can't really tell people like, oh yeah, I went to heaven or hell. But people that have a brush with death, they could come back and say, oh, I had an experience.
All had a near-death experience.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few. Like Stephen was starting to see the other side. And
it's hard to adjust to this world when you realize that this is not, we're not operating on all cylinders here, and I'm hoping for a great awakening in this world, and it's what Jesus told me they're waiting for. By they, I mean God, heaven. They're waiting for the big awakening of this world.
So do you consider the last days, quote unquote, or the end of the age as being the great awakening, or do you look at it like Jesus will return to coexist with us, or we're going to be taken up into the clouds? Is it all metaphor to you as far as that's concerned?
No, the Spirit of Christ will be in every person.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and I've heard this interpretation too, and it's extremely compelling to me, because I often look at like the book of Revelation when it talks about we'll each be given a white stone, and we're going to join Christ and the cornerstone of this building. We're all going to build this building with each of the stones, right? And it's going to become the New Jerusalem, which is all parabolic to me. We are the white stones that are part of this New Jerusalem, and this great awakening, which it's so obvious that people are starting to wake up from their slumber.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean,
I hope.
I'm starting to see it a lot more. Or you might say I'm starting to see the division between the sheep and the goats.
Yeah,
Uh, because there's a lot of people that are getting deeper into their slumber, and then there's other people that are starting to wake up more.
yeah,
And there is that division.
yeah,
Everything is a metaphor in a lot of ways. And I'm trying to contrast. I know that there's types and shadows. So there's an aspect that is reality, and then there's an aspect of something spiritual behind it.
right.
Can we expand a little bit on this concept of Christ in us? What do you mean by that when you say that?
Um, I want to recommend two books. One is Imagine Heaven by John Burke, which
Okay.
is about near-death experiences, and it touches on this topic a lot. The other one is a book that I think is full of truth and goodness, and it's The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. He's
Okay.
a Franciscan priest who lives in New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And
Okay.
There was the Jesus event, which was approximately 30 years, 2,000 years ago, where fully human, fully divine incarnation. But there's also the Christ event, which is one with God. In theology, we call him the creative activity of God, the divine economia. And that's always been simultaneous with God. And that's what we're looking forward to, is when the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Christ, also known as the Holy Spirit, not only lives but reigns in every heart and every mind in the world. And that's what we're looking forward to. The book of Revelation was written to a specific audience at a specific time. And that time was a terrible time for Christians. And they all understood the symbols used in that book. Like, for example, 666 is the numerological equivalent of Neron, which is Latin for Nero.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, they knew when they were talking about the great Satan being 666, it was Nero. I mean, they all knew that.
By the way, I don't really look at the Antichrist as being a person. I think, I mean, it could be, but I'm saying that anybody that operates from the spirit of Antichrist is Antichrist.
Right.
So, and I think that there's
been lots of Antichrists, lots of them, not none. Yeah.
So, when Revelation talks about the beast, I actually feel like, and Daniel, when it talks about the beasts, these are government systems that rise up, and I think the seven-headed beast with 10 horns is the new world order. It's going to be the final government system that's in place before Jesus or the Christ conscious. I don't know if you could look at a Christ consciousness awakens, or if you consider Jesus actually returning and that he's that stone that destroys the statue of.
Well, I think Christ consciousness is a good term.
Okay, because I've looked at it from both angles, and to be honest with you, I'm not so opposed to there being a great awakening in people, or Christ consciousness, so to speak, before the physical return of Jesus. But again, I really it's to be seen, because but with all the parabolic or metaphoric type things that I'm seeing in the Bible, I'm starting to realize that, or just the nature of mythology, it seems to me like that, the message that is, so like when Jesus was speaking in parables, he's trying to say it in a way where people can understand where he's coming from.
Right.
But he also says, how are you going to understand heavenly things when you can't even understand earthly things, or something like that? So I think that there's a little bit lost in translation as far as trying to, understand the mind of God.